Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar on the Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap for the United States. I'm really happy to see everyone who's tuned in here live, but I do want to note that we will be recording today's session so that anyone who missed out, or if you want to return to this content, you can watch it later. And we'll be sending out a link to everyone who registered, so you don't have to worry about finding that. My name's Sarah Mason, and I'm a Senior Policy Associate at the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability at Duke University, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. I do want to note that after all the presentations are finished, we are going to have a Q&A and discussion. So if you do have questions for our presenters, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and we can try to get to as many of those questions as possible at the end. This webinar is the fourth session of a series called Current Issues in Nature-Based Solutions. And we've really seen growing interest in nature-based solutions coming from both the public and private sectors, along with a strong desire to scale up implementation. So this webinar series is just a group of presentations and conversations around nature-based solutions, effectiveness, execution, funding, and policies to help inform this growing interest moving forward. The series is being hosted by the National Ecosystem Services Partnership, or NESP, as well as the Resilience Roadmap Project. NESP is a coordinating platform for a network of public and private individuals and organizations working on implementation of ecosystem service concepts at the national level in the US. And the Resilience Roadmap Project is aimed at gathering expertise on climate resilience policy in the United States and making actionable recommendations for how to build greater climate resilience through federal action. So I'm going to drop links to the hosting organizations as well as the webinar series in the chat if you do want to learn more about any of those. So we do have a few other sessions in the works. So if you'd like to join any of our future webinars, please stay tuned as we get those scheduled. And if you do want to hear about these and other upcoming related events, you can sign up for the NESP mailing list, which means you'll get our quarterly newsletter and future webinar announcements. So you can either do that using the QR code on the screen or through the link that's going to be coming in the chat. So with that out of the way, I am going to stop sharing and we can really get started. The webinar is going to be split into three sections today. We'll first be hearing a presentation about the roadmap itself, the Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap for the United States. And we'll hear remarks from two federal agency representatives after that, sharing what the roadmap means for their agency's programming moving ahead. And then I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion. So for the opening presentation on the Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap, I'm very happy to welcome two of the authors of that document here today. First is Lydia Olander, Director of Nature-Based Resilience at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and Heather Tallis, Assistant Director for Biodiversity and Conservation Sciences at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So whenever you're ready, we can start sharing your slides.
Great, I think I'm going to kick off. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Tallis. Nice to be with you today. Thank you for taking time to hear about this new report. We'll go ahead with the next slide. So this report is one of several different efforts being led out of the White House on nature in general. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of a broader framing and overview of some of the other nature efforts that are underway and give you a sense of how they relate to the roadmap. So I'll start here with a brief overview of some of the other White House efforts and set up the Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap. And then Lydia will go into more detail about the content of the report and the main findings. So there's just a general recognition driving and motivating this work that nature is absolutely critical to our economy and to our lives and to achieving our national goals on several major administration priorities, including climate change, equity, and economic prosperity. And so the Biden-Harris White House is leading several all-of-government efforts to help us better know nature in the United States, better account for its many values, and to continue to grow nature across the nation. Next slide. So this is a slide that just tries to capture a few of the efforts that we have underway around these nature-related entry points. Of course, we're going to talk today about one of the major efforts to help us grow nature. Many of you are probably aware of an earlier effort by the administration, America the Beautiful, and one of President Biden's first acts in his term here was to commit the United States to conserving 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030. We know that's not all that's needed, and so the Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap is an additional effort to try to take further actions across all major sectors and agencies to continue to invest in nature for its multiple benefits. As we do continue to take more action today, we still don't have a complete picture of how nature is doing in the United States and how it's contributing to our goals, to our economy, and to our lives. So we have additional efforts to help us account for specifically nature's connections to the economy. We announced last year for the first time that the U.S. will produce natural capital accounts, and that effort is well underway with the strategy for adoption of those accounts about to be finalized. And there's additional efforts ongoing across several EOP offices to improve ecosystem service valuation guidance. So we continue to have increased capacity in the federal government to account for the economic values nature provides. We, of course, know that's not the whole picture of nature. It has its own values for its intrinsic sake and also interacts with our lives in other ways. And so there are two other efforts to help us better know nature. One is the American Conservation and Stewardship Atlas, which is a sister effort of America the Beautiful, and that will be the major tracking mechanism to show how we're doing and making progress towards conserving 30% of U.S. lands and waters. Of course, that also is not the whole picture of nature in the nation, and so we have an additional new effort being led by USGCRP, the National Nature Assessment. On the next slide, I'm going to say just a little more about that effort because we do have a public comment period open right now that I want to make sure you're all aware of. The next slide. So again, this is part of the broader set of efforts to know nature in the nation. Next slide. And this is really in recognition of the knowledge gap we have of having sort of pieces of the puzzle of what's going on with nature in the United States, but not having a comprehensive picture. So on Earth Day last year, President Biden called for the National Nature Assessment to take stock of U.S. lands, waters, wildlife, biodiversity, ecosystems, and the benefits that they provide. So obviously creating space here for additional consideration of nature-based solutions with an emphasis on understanding how nature connects to the economy, to public health, to the climate, to equity and environmental justice, and to national security. So with that broad scope, USGCRP has started undertaking this assessment, but we really want it to be use-inspired and driven by its possible applications. And so there is a public comment period open now through the end of March with a lot of really wide open questions about what this assessment should be. And so if you are interested in any aspects of nature in the United States, nature-based solutions, or other avenues where you think having a large synthesis around a certain question would be very helpful, we really want to hear about that in this public comment period. So the QR code there will take you to the Federal Register notice and describe the questions we have open for comment now. Next slide. So as I mentioned, while we have this evidence gap, we do know enough today to do more for nature, and we know it's essential to reverse the current trends in nature loss that we're seeing in several parts of the country. Next slide. And so in the same executive order where the president called to the National Nature Assessment, he also called for a report that identified opportunities for accelerating nature-based solutions across the country. This is in clear recognition that there simply is no path to net zero without new and additional investments in nature. And so just as one example of the gaps that we know still exist in sort of unlocking the full potential of nature-based solutions, we know that up to 30% of the mitigation that we need to reach the current national climate goals can come from nature-based mitigation. But right now, we're only achieving 1/3 of that potential. There's a lot of other potential for risk reduction, climate adaptation, and other social benefits to come from nature-based options that are still untapped. And so it's a clear recognition that we're in a moment where we really need an all hands on deck, all tools in the toolbox approach to addressing the climate crisis that the president called for more action through federal agencies on nature-based approaches. And so responding to that executive order, OSTP, CEQ, and the Domestic Climate Policy Office co-led a large interagency effort to produce the nature-based solutions roadmap. Next slide. We were very lucky to be able to work closely with representatives from 15 agencies with many departments, including our colleagues that are on the call today. This really was a very broad all-of-government effort. And this is the first time that there has been a set of strategic recommendations addressing all federal agencies on where the biggest opportunities are to unlock the full potential of nature-based solutions. And the real main take-home message, the top line takeaway from this report that was released at COP27 by John Podesta is that nature-based solutions should be go-to options for climate equity and prosperity. And we know how to get there now with the strategic roadmap and the steps that are laid out here. Next slide. So very briefly, I'll just give a couple of high-level points about the framing of the report, and then Lydia will go into the details of the strategies that are identified. So in the context of this report, nature-based solutions are framed very broadly. While there was a climate motivation for looking at nature-based approaches, it's not the only sort of social benefits that are included here in the recommendations. We do recognize and include in the report a list of the multiple definitions that are used across federal agencies today and the variety of terms that people use as different entry points, like green infrastructure or nature-based features. We use this broad definition in the report as an umbrella definition that's comprehensive of those different approaches, and that's pretty closely aligned with recently internationally adopted definitions. So in the context of the report here, nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural or modified ecosystems to address societal challenges. And very importantly here, simultaneously providing benefits for both people and the environment. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there's certainly a motivation here to be thinking about growth in nature-based solutions for mitigation in the climate context and for the variety of risk reduction and adaptation benefits that they can provide. But there's a broader framing and a clear recognition of other social benefits from these solutions, including jobs, water quality, food production, wildlife and biodiversity support, community development, health, and many others. Next slide. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Lydia to go into more details of the specific recommendations of the report.
Thank you, Heather. So the goals of the roadmap report were to provide a common vision of what nature-based solutions are and what benefits they can provide to the nation, to elevate nature-based solutions as a go-to option, as Heather said, for climate, ecosystems, equity, and prosperity, and to do this on par with other tools that are being put forward to help us address climate change, including renewable energy, seawalls, and electric vehicles. We also want to show that the federal agencies and others have decades of experience and know enough about nature-based solutions to scale up now. We wanted to give agencies a strategic path to unlock the full potential of nature-based solutions and to shine a light on the different opportunities to implement nature-based solutions in newer areas, such as hazard reduction and infrastructure, that have large federal investments moving forward from the infrastructure and climate bills that recently passed. Next slide, please. There were 5 strategic areas for action identified in the roadmap report. The first is around updating policies and guidance related to federal planning, decision-making, cost sharing, risk management processes, and benefit cost analysis to better facilitate nature-based solutions. This included activities like improving accounting for nature and benefit cost analysis, building regional multi-jurisdictional permitting teams with nature-based solutions expertise to expedite permitting of nature-based projects, pushing for nature-based solutions to be included in alternatives that are considered by agencies in their decision-making around things like the National Environmental Policy Act, environmental impact statements, regulatory impact analysis, flood standards. Also reviewing opportunities to reduce cost share requirements on nature-based solutions projects for underserved communities. The number of examples on the policy and guidance side. Moving on to the second area, funding. The report talks about prioritizing nature-based solutions and funding decisions for domestic and international projects, increasing and easing access to this funding, and catalyzing private investment. This includes a number of different examples, embedding nature-based solutions in notices of funding opportunities from federal agencies to raise awareness of how nature-based solutions can fit into these different programs, and share case studies and examples of how nature-based solutions are used. Doing the same in partnership with states for formula funding programs. Many federal agencies have these types of funds that they give out to states that then the states then implement. They come from EPA, FEMA, DOT, HUD, Army Corps, and many others. We also, there's also information on coordinating funding opportunities around common priorities, like specific geographies or activities. For example, in the conservation area, there's the America the Beautiful Fund that has moved forward to coordinate funding from multiple agencies around conservation. This is an example of the kinds of models for aligning funding that could move forward. There's also recommendations around working with multilateral development banks to set ambitious goals around nature-based solutions, and catalyzing innovative finance using tools like National Science Foundation Innovation Hubs, green banks, and insurance programs. The third area is around getting our house in order. So expanding the use of nature-based solutions in the design, retrofitting, and management of federal facilities and in the management of federal lands and waters. This includes federal agency adaptation plans, incorporating nature-based solutions more fully into that adaptation planning process, incorporating nature-based solutions more fully into building standards and elevating them within that. Expanding the focus of nature-based solutions in land management plans that are put forth by agencies like the Forest Service, the Department of Interior, and Department of Defense. And increasing co-stewardship and co-management agreements with tribes for implementation of nature-based solutions. Next slide. The fourth area is around improving resources and training for a nature-based solutions-ready workforce. This included shared learning across federal agencies. There's things like a relatively new Green Infrastructure Collaborative, that's an interagency group that is building shared learning across the agencies. There's also a new technical working group on the frontiers of benefit cost analysis that will work on better incorporating nature into nature-based solutions for benefit cost analysis. Also embedding nature-based solutions in training, assistantships, and workforce offerings into a broad array of different federal programs. This could be Department of Labor programs, AmeriCorps, Job Corps, and many other types of federal programs that could incorporate nature-based solutions for a wide range of jobs across the entire spectrum for developing these projects, planning, accounting, budgeting, construction, engineering, maintenance, etc. Recommendations included developing tools and resources to help consultants and others implement nature-based solutions, and providing resources for embedding nature-based solutions into STEAM curriculum and education programs. And last but not least, the fifth area is advancing research, innovation, and knowledge to incentivize continual learning about how and where nature-based solutions work best, and build needed models and tools for implementation. This included recommendations on filling gaps in evidence on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions, and increased engagement with Indigenous knowledge holders to ensure that their knowledge is incorporated. Advancing monitoring with common measures so that we can assess effectiveness across projects, while also adaptively managing these nature-based projects. Also included are greater research investments on nature-based solutions effectiveness from federal research agencies and grants, and development of integrated quantitative models for nature-based solutions that can link to the engineering, economic, equity, and health outcomes. And these models are really needed for the design and evaluation of nature-based solutions projects. And also assessing the scale of opportunity and need for nature-based solutions. We have an example of this that's been done for carbon sequestration across the US, giving a sense of how much more opportunity there is to expand nature-based solutions for carbon storage and sequestration. We don't have the same for other nature-based solutions related to risk reduction or health benefits, so expanding those types of assessments of the scale of opportunity. So moving on to slide 5. The next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. We also have a guide, a resources guide that was released alongside the roadmap report. Federal agencies have decades of experience, as I've said, piloting, testing, and supporting nature-based solutions, and have a number of great resources on their websites. 3 of those are highlighted here, and I think there'll be links put in the chat. The EPA has a green infrastructure website, NOAA has a coastal natural infrastructure website, and the Army Corps' Engineering with Nature website all have fantastic resources on nature-based solutions. And the resources guide that we released along with the roadmap report includes over 30 different examples of specific projects and programs that utilize nature-based solutions. And it also collated information on over 175 different agency resources, data, tools, training, and technical assistance that are available from the federal agencies already. While this seems like a lot, we did see that there were some areas where we had a lot of resources and other areas where we still had room to grow and increase the resources that are available. Next slide, please. The administration has already taken a number of actions that will help accelerate deployment of nature-based solutions. So I'm just going to run through a quick overview of those. First, there's a number of large investments, for example, in forest health and fish passages that have come through recent bills that are currently being implemented. There's also an interesting new experiment going on. FEMA has introduced an alternative cost effectiveness method that creates flexibility for when mitigation projects can be considered cost effective under certain conditions. So what this has allowed FEMA to do is to explore projects that meet certain criteria. In this case, this includes criteria for benefit activities that benefit disadvantaged communities, that address climate change impacts, and include hard to quantify benefits like nature-based solutions projects. So there's an opportunity for these projects to move forward at a lower discount rate. And we're exploring the implications of this kind of a program with FEMA. Another example, another activity that has moved forward is a bilateral agreement with Australia to advance natural capital accounting and nature-based solutions. The joint statement that called for a common approach to natural capital accounting and to share experiences, methods, and learning regarding accounting and coordinating across states and territories and weaving in diverse cultures, including Indigenous peoples. And the agreement includes facilitating opportunities for global leadership and agenda setting on natural capital accounting and nature-based solutions, and encourages other countries and nations to do the same. Another action is this federal technical working group to build capacity on valuing nature-based solutions and benefit cost analysis. There's also an effort to increase the number of federal grant programs and the funding in those programs that can be used for nature-based solutions. There's also an evaluation of the state of evidence for a wide range of nature-based solutions benefits underway by the U.S. Global Change Research Program. That evaluation will give us a sense of where we have a strong evidence, a set of evidence around the benefits of nature-based solutions and where we don't, so we can prioritize research funding moving forward. And finally, there's a new effort to elevate the roadmap recommendations through the Federal Green Infrastructure Collaborative, which I mentioned previously. This group is going to be coordinating action on multiple strategic areas that were identified in the report, including shared learning, training, technical assistance, and permitting. Next slide. So there are a number of different things we've identified that we think partners can do independently or in partnership with federal agencies to support this work. First is to review the roadmap for relevance to your own programs and your own projects and create your own roadmap for action. Second is to raise awareness of nature-based solutions and potential funding sources to your local and state officials, to permitting officials and communities that you work with. This could include helping states find ways to encourage nature-based solutions in their federally supported state formula funding programs. We work with state and local governments to incorporate nature-based solutions into adaptation and hazard recovery and resilience planning where appropriate. To help train key partners like permitting officials, resilience officials, and oversight boards and city planners, and to share case studies and best practices. Another area is to help build capacity and provide technical assistance to underserved and tribal communities matched to the needs of communities, which will go well beyond the need for nature-based solutions, but ideally bring nature-based solutions into the solution set that is considered by communities. Another area is strengthening the nature-based solutions workforce through things like enhanced training in nature-based solutions. The private sector partners, the professional associations, and others can help target training to areas in need of jobs and economic development. Also, maybe worth considering developing nature-based solutions certification programs that could give workers and firms with those certifications greater opportunity. And this could also help communities or developers hire those with the nature-based solution skills needed, but we need to make sure that such certification programs are inclusive. And finally, we can use help and support expanding the evaluation of nature-based solutions and developing the planning models that we talked about previously. We need help integrating Indigenous knowledges on nature-based solution, on evaluating effectiveness, on building integrated scenario models and tools, and to help continue development of an implementation standards, guidance, tools, and resources that are really going to be essential to put nature-based solutions on the ground. This report lays out the national roadmap for federal action, but also hopefully provides entry points for academic, private sector, NGO, and other partners in advancing nature-based solutions. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach to move at the pace needed. We'd like to thank the National Ecosystem Services Partnership and the Resilience Roadmap for the opportunity to present on this report, and we look forward to hearing the ideas of today's audience and answering your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heather and Lydia. That was a really great overview of both the roadmap as well as related work going on in the administration. So I want to now turn it over to Kim Penn, who is Acting Manager for the Communities Program at the NOAA Office for Coastal Management, to share about what this roadmap means for NOAA.
Great, thanks, Sarah, for inviting me, and congratulations to Lydia and Heather and everyone again on the release of the roadmap. NOAA has really appreciated being a part of that process. And we're excited about the impact that it will have. So this was a daunting ask, by the way. I have 10 minutes to cover NOAA and nature-based solutions, so I'm going to speak as quickly as I can. So next slide. Set the stage. I'll start with a high-level quick overview of NOAA. Our mission, in short, is one of science, service, and stewardship, and our guiding vision is a future where our communities, ecosystems, and economies are healthy and resilient in the face of change. Across the agency, we work to understand and predict changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts, to share that knowledge and information with others, and to conserve and manage our coastal and marine ecosystems and resources. One of the threads that weaves across much of the work that NOAA does, and that we believe is a really critical component of resilient ecosystems, communities, and economies is, of course, natural infrastructure. As Heather led off with, we believe that nature is essential. We study it, we restore it, we invest in it, and have been, as Lydia said, for decades. So because of the way the roadmap's call to action and recommendations really relate to and related to nature-based solutions dovetail so well with NOAA's mission overall, I've organized the next 10 minutes in that way. I'm using our bins of science, service, and stewardship to highlight some examples of programs and investments that really connect to, support, and will be advanced by the roadmap. Please note, as I said at the beginning, this was a daunting task, and so the presentation is not at all comprehensive, but it's really just illustrative of some of the types of investments that we're making that connect with and advance the recommendations. Next slide. So though I'm kind of traveling in reverse on the roadmap. Recommendation-wise, I'm going to start with NOAA's science. NOAA's investments in interdisciplinary research are really helping to close the knowledge gaps and better understand nature-based solutions, the services they provide, such as carbon sequestration, or erosion control, or critical habitat, and the efficacy of those different approaches to reduce coastal hazards impacts and build community resilience. NOAA also invests in social science research that helps us explore how people use and value coastal ecosystems and respond to information on vulnerability and risk, which then in turn informs the way that we communicate about and manage those resources. These science investments really provide the foundation for the service and stewardship elements of NOAA's mission, which I'll get to in a little bit. So various programs across NOAA engage in science that advances our knowledge of nature-based solutions. That they include the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science and the Climate Program Office, other offices in our Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, and NIMS, as well as our partner programs like Sea Grant and the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. That's a lot. So I'm just going to touch on two specific and very current efforts that are directly related to gaps identified or recommendations within the roadmap. So I'm going to start with one that's happening in conjunction actually with our NOAA library. And it's focused on understanding the efficacy of nature-based solutions, and it's called systematic evidence mapping. Through this project, an interdisciplinary research team is working to identify, collate, and map the evidence base surrounding the performance of nature-based solutions in coastal ecosystems. The result of this synthesis, which hopefully will be done in the next year or so, will highlight the current knowledge on nature-based solution performance and then help to inform approaches for performance monitoring and evaluation of these types of solutions. The other one that I just want to touch on is a recent coordinated investment by NOAA and our agency colleagues at the Federal Highway Administration, and it was made through NOAA's Effects of Sea Level Rise program. This program, the Effects of Sea Level Rise program, really advances science that explores natural solutions and policy changes that can protect ecosystems, infrastructure, and communities against flooding caused by sea level rise and storm surge. So this joint competition specifically focused, so both agencies put in funding to fund research projects that integrated the science on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions to reduce coastal flooding with science on pavement deterioration due to inundation. So the information that will be gathered from this research will help to inform coastal transportation infrastructure. So those are just two, tip of the iceberg. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to switch gears and talk about service. Services at NOAA include how we share knowledge, how we help build capacity across our programs, and how we develop decision support tools and provide training and technical assistance. As you might expect, NOAA has developed a suite of resources to help our partners better understand, plan for, and implement nature-based solutions. The roadmap recommendations really closely align with those priorities and investments, Lydia spoke earlier to the suite of resources that we have available. I'm also going to speak to some of those. There are many ways that we deliver services across the agency. We have regional staff and place-based partners such as Sea Grant and the National Estuarine Research Reserve System and the Sanctuary System. We also do that through online platforms such as the Climate Resilience Toolkit and the Digital Coast. I'm going to focus mostly on the Digital Coast because it really houses a depth and breadth of resources that can help our partners advance and scale up the use of nature-based solutions. They align well with the needs articulated in the roadmap. So if you haven't visited recently, please Google it up. The URL is right down there. And to get to the resources on natural infrastructure, just go to topic page and natural infrastructure. So next slide. So I'm just going to highlight a couple here. I'm going to start with the Green Infrastructure Effectiveness Database because understanding the effectiveness of these types of approaches is front and foremost in a lot of people's minds. This database is searchable. It contains literature specifically focused on effectiveness to reduce coastal hazards. You can filter using region or scale, hazards of interest or types of natural infrastructure. You can also select source type. So for example, if you only want peer-reviewed publications or you only want case studies, you can do that. While it is focused on the efficacy, you can also see the related to hazard mitigation. You can also see the additional benefits or ecosystem services that were studied in the literature. We've recently focused a number of updates to include resources that provide economic information on the costs and benefits. And there are, I think at this point, north of 200 resources in there. So drawing from that increased literature on economics, we designed a suite of quick references also available on Digital Coast. Those are to help users understand and incorporate costs and benefits associated with different natural infrastructure approaches into their decision making. And finally, we have launched a suite of trainings to help partners incorporate that economic information into economic analyses. This have been developed to address growing needs of our partners to access funding and financing for nature-based solutions that require different types of benefit cost analyses or other benefit analyses. So those are online trainings, virtual trainings. You can also do in-person trainings and access technical assistance. Next slide. I gotta speed up. There's also a funding and financing coastal resilience webinar series that you can find online to learn about accessing, understanding and accessing federal or all sorts of funding and financing options that can help our partners invest in coastal resilience and nature-based solutions. The webinar series provides engagement with experts and access to the resources. All of the webinars and the associated resources, such as quick references and case studies, are available online. Since the initial one that was sort of on the basics, we've had them on environmental impact bonds, partnering with community development financial institutions, building capacity, and stormwater credit trading and others. So check those out. Next slide. And finally, I'm going to move on to stewardship, where really the rubber meets the road here. So I'm bidding in stewardship, where we implement policies and programs and partnerships that advance nature-based solutions, and where we really invest in the conservation, restoration, and creation of natural and nature-based solutions for hazard mitigation, carbon sequestration, diversity of other benefits with the diversity of partners. We're really big on partners. I've included a number of them here that are directly relevant to our work in natural infrastructure, from those that we work with to advance science, to providing education and decision support, to investment, implementation, and on-the-ground projects. So we also partner across the federal family. We partner closely with EPA and FEMA, Army Corps, and then a suite of other academic and nonprofit organizations. A few examples from these partnerships actually can be found in the Nature-Based Solutions resource guide that was mentioned earlier. So check those out. And I noted these partnerships in particular because they provided a really strong foundation for the successful implementation of the historic investments of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. So clearly, the roadmap aligns with and builds on our current investments across the agency, but it also directly relates to a lot of the investments that will be made through these historic opportunities. We are really in an exciting time of unprecedented investment in natural infrastructure. That will help us to accelerate planning for and implementation of projects like this. So I'll touch quick on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It provided nearly $3 billion for NOAA to take action over 5 years in areas of habitat restoration, coastal resilience, and weather forecasting. Of that, almost $1.5 billion of investment will be made to natural infrastructure projects that build coastal resilience, restore habitat, create jobs, and store carbon. And those investments and those initiatives we're calling climate ready coasts. There's habitat protection and restoration through the coastal zone management programs and the National Estuarine Research Reserves. That's $207 million and $77 million over 5 years, respectively. There's also habitat restoration grants that are supporting really transformational projects that restore habitat for fisheries and protected resources and increase community resilience. Also those that are building capacity for underserved communities to implement habitat restoration. And then there's the National Coastal Resilience Fund. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law significantly increased investment in the National Coastal Resilience Fund that is run out of NIFWA, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The new funding through NCRF, the National Coastal Resilience Fund, will also provide additional support for the most vulnerable and historically disadvantaged communities, including enhanced engagement and technical assistance to support applicants and grantees. And then finally, the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't have much to say about that. We're very excited about the opportunity that will be provided by the Inflation Reduction Act to advance climate resilience. We hope to be able to share details on this funding, how this funding will be executed soon. They're still being discussed across the agency and the department and at the administration level, but we look forward to sharing that in the next couple of months. Next slide. So in closing, advancing nature-based solutions is something that we've been investing in across our mission areas and with many of our partners for decades. And we're really looking forward to working more closely together to scale up the implementation of these types of approaches that strengthen communities and economies and also help tackle the climate crisis. That's all.
Thank you so much, Kim.
I know. Sorry.
That's okay. I know we did assign you a very hard task of talking about a whole agency's work on nature-based solutions in just a few minutes. So we've also asked EPA to do the same thing. So our final remarks today will be from Stephanie Santel, who's a senior climate advisor in the Office of Policy and the Office of the Administrator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, to share about how EPA is moving ahead with the roadmap in place.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today with all of you and a really amazing group of panelists that we have here. So there's a lot to cover and we have limited time, so I'm going to jump right in. So as Lydia and Heather mentioned, there's a lot of agencies, including EPA, that have been doing this work for quite some time now, supporting the use of nature-based solutions, or NBS, in our efforts to protect and restore critical ecosystems, improve water quality and air quality, address climate impacts, and just support overall community well-being. So that is definitely what we're doing, and using these approaches that can help communities address many challenges at once, as our other panelists noted earlier. So I'm going to quickly talk about how EPA has been working to support the use of NBS in the context of the agency's broader climate adaptation goals and priorities from where I sit in the Office of Policy in our Climate Adaptation Program. So one of the main goals of this webinar and the series is to really strengthen that connection between nature-based solutions practitioners and climate change professionals. So I thought it was pretty important to draw those connections for everybody here today. In fact, one of the priming actions within the report is to strengthen agency climate adaptation plans with the inclusion of nature-based solutions. And what's really important about that is that, similar to climate adaptation, we're also going to be potentially thinking about how to advance nature-based solutions within a similar mechanism of how we've approached adaptation, or in the same vein as adaptation. So across multiple executive orders and themes and priority areas, of course, we have the Executive Order 14008, which is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. Like other federal agencies, we released our Climate Adaptation Action Plan in October of 2021 in response to the EO, which also established Justice 40 Initiative, America the Beautiful's 30 by 30 Conservation Policy, and other similar initiatives. Our plan and our associated adaptation policy statement outline our general long-term commitments to not only integrate climate adaptation into EPA's programs, our policies, our operations, so that we can achieve our mission long-term as the climate changes, but also partner with a variety of stakeholders, states, tribes, territories, local governments, and communities of all sizes and types to really strengthen their adaptive capacity. These commitments are actually reflected in 20 climate adaptation implementation plans that our offices have developed to execute the 5 priority areas outlined in the agency-wide action plan that you see here. And I put them up against the roadmap strategic recommendations because there's a lot of connectivity and similarities between them where we can draw areas of alignment. Okay, so let's talk more about some of those program activities that we've committed to through those implementation plans and the agency-wide plan that can really help advance nature-based solutions. So I don't think these categories here would be particularly surprising to anybody, but we do have this myriad of resources that's available to help a variety of our external partners undertake not only climate mitigation and adaptation activities, but within that, activities that can really advance low impact development, green infrastructure, other types of nature-based solutions that we can work through our programs. And many programs and initiatives at EPA often provide a mix of these types of support. It's usually not one or the other. So let's jump into a little bit more granular detail on what that looks like. I'm not going to cover all of these program activities or collaborative opportunities that you see here, but I certainly will try to do them justice. So since the release of EPA's Climate Adaptation Action Plan, our offices have been not only working together, but with other federal partners like NOAA to perform several actions that can help build community resilience and address climate impacts. And that's including through the application of nature-based solutions. So these actions include core program efforts, as well as collaborative initiatives that support this holistic integrated watershed management approach that can help bring together the right set of participants and that appropriately scale actions to the size of the challenge at hand. So thinking about watershed-wide planning frameworks, integrated planning for climate impacts on existing wastewater and stormwater systems, and what have you. So first and foremost, we're integrating climate change considerations throughout EPA's funding and financing programs to encourage projects that increase adaptive capacity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also leveraging a variety of those programs to help invest in natural infrastructure, such as supporting states' innovative use of their state revolving funds, or SRFs, as they're commonly called, to help communities build resilient water infrastructure and adapt to climate change. The SRFs support a very wide range of eligible uses and projects, including for green infrastructure and nature-based solutions that can serve multiple community goals, like building green space in nature-deprived communities, energy efficiency, climate adaptation for impacts like drought, wildfire, soil health. In fact, the majority of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law's water infrastructure funds, which was about $43 billion, will be distributed to states through the SRF capitalization grant. So that's a very large amount of our bill funding. As the geographic and the national estuary programs at EPA receive almost $2 billion in bipartisan infrastructure law funds, they'll also be prioritizing investments in local capacity building and ecosystem restoration and nature-based solutions and other climate adaptation activities. And that's in addition to a lot of the typical monitoring, watershed restoration, and community outreach that they're performing. So these programs are really great at using collaborative partnerships and leveraging additional funding for projects that sustain their local ecosystems, their communities, and their economies, including nature-based solutions, which ranges from seagrass and wetland restoration to urban park and forestry initiatives. We're also advancing the adoption of non-point source water quality actions that provide climate resilience co-benefits under our Clean Water Act Section 319 grant program, or the non-point source program, which will be working with grantees in states, tribes, and territories to help identify what those opportunities will be for promoting such practices. So that's to come, and it's pretty exciting. So in the second category that I showed on the previous slide, we're going to also be scaling up our technical assistance initiatives to help stakeholders, especially the recipients of federal funds, assess their climate risks, identify resilient solutions, and implement projects. And this again includes nature-based solutions. We're establishing an unprecedented technical assistance initiative to support communities with applying for more than $43 billion in those Bill SRF funds, with a focus on disadvantaged and underserved communities. And that will help them identify infrastructure needs, plan capital improvements, apply for eligible projects again under that SRF funding. We're also developing decentralized technical assistance centers, such as our Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers and our Environmental Finance Centers, to directly help communities access funding and invest in projects. And programs like our Wetlands and Coastal Management programs also have technical assistance initiatives like our Climate Ready Estuaries program, which will be working with local decision makers to help them understand their climate risks and identify adaptive solutions. And that's definitely all about ecosystem restoration and protection. Third, very similar to NOAA, we're working to provide the data, information, and the tools that our partners need to make climate-informed decisions with other agencies under a whole of the government approach. And this includes developing tools that can help improve the usability and accessibility of climate data and other environmental data for local decision-making, like EJ Screen. We have our National Stormwater Calculator and also How's My Waterway app. And that's in addition to supporting some of the administration's current tools like Camera. We're also offering a variety of training by our programs, like the Non-Point Source program again, which will be publishing modules that promote nature-based and green infrastructure opportunities across more than 170 million in annual grants. And we have a lot of other training platforms like the Living Shorelines Academy, Watershed Academy, Green Infrastructure Webinar Series, and earlier CEQ mentioned our portal on green infrastructure. And then lastly, across all of these efforts, we're focused on building resilience in communities that are going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change or already experiencing those impacts from climate change. So we do have a heat island reduction program that's developing communications and technical materials to help raise awareness and share solutions related to disproportionate health impacts. We also have a new American Rescue Plan funded equitable resilience program that's sitting down working with states and tribes to design green infrastructure projects and package those designs with cost benefit analyses so that we can see more competitive nature-based projects that are eligible for FEMA's BRIC funding. So that's a pretty cool interagency connection there. And we have many, many more really great examples. CEQ mentioned the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative that's going on. And we also have been partnering with private sector, nonprofits, philanthropy, and more that can really help communities identify, design, and invest in and scale these innovative, more nature-based solutions-focused projects. So that's a lot. As you can see, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot to go and partnership opportunities to explore, especially with the new investments made possible by both the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. I definitely invite everybody to check out our climate adaptation webpage that has all 20 of those implementation plans there for you to read, specifically for ones that resonate in the area that you live. And with that, I will turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much. For all of us working in the nature-based solutions space, all of those presentations were really encouraging to hear. So I do want to shift us now to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So if all our panelists could jump back on their videos. I know that some panelists do need to hop off at the top of the hour or very close to that, so we can try to squeeze in as much as we can here. And Stephanie, could you just stop sharing? Your slides are still up. No worries. Thank you. So I'm going to jump in here with kind of a macro question. And I think this is more targeted at Lydia and Heather. But could you take a moment to sort of compare the US to other countries and where they're at with nature-based solutions? So with the roadmap in place now, is the US kind of at the forefront of nature-based solutions and pushing those forward? Or are other countries further along and we've kind of been learning from them? So could you just talk a little bit about if that has come up at all, if we've done comparing and contrasting with other folks working on these same challenges?
I think we can probably both comment. So I'll start and then I'm sure Lydia will add. So I think it's fair to say that some countries have done more on individual avenues of adoption of nature-based solutions than the US. To our knowledge, this is the first sort of comprehensive all of government strategic look at what the opportunities are to do more and looking at sort of all of the functions of government. Not just sort of typical conservation entry points or not just research and evidence building activities, but really looking across all of the actions that federal agencies can take and what the opportunities for all sector and sort of agency mission entry points are. We are seeing some receptiveness to that kind of approach from other countries in early conversations now and are hoping other countries might follow with their own roadmaps. And I'll just mention there's been some really productive conversation recently with Canada with their infrastructure agencies on just lessons sharing, knowledge sharing, and continuing conversations with that infrastructure entry point. We had very productive conversations with Germany at COP15, who are, have done a lot on nature-based solutions. They're very excited about continuing to move that forward under several different mechanisms. So again, I think we have lessons to learn and have continued to learn from other countries on specific pathways, but we do think that this roadmap approach is hopefully going to be a powerful example that other countries will replicate.
Nothing to add. I think even another question if we can.
Sure. Okay, sounds good. Could you, this is also sort of for the development side of the report, but someone asked a little bit about the process. What did developing the roadmap actually look like?
Yeah, I'll start on that one and then turn it over to Heather. So we had an interagency process. So those 15 agencies that Heather mentioned were part of a multi-month process of identifying the challenges to implementing nature-based solutions across the federal agencies, and then trying to think about what some of the opportunities were to move forward and address those challenges and accelerate deployment of nature-based solutions. So that was one piece. And then we also did a series of engagements with external groups. So we had a tribal consultation and a series of roundtables that brought in a number of different kinds of organizations, including the NGOs, the private sector, local communities, members of the environmental justice community, and others to get their advice and input on the same questions, like what are the challenges you're seeing, what are the opportunities, what would you suggest the federal agencies do, and incorporated all of that into building the plan and the roadmap that you see in the report.
Anything to add, Heather? And if anyone does need to drop off, please feel free to just leave, but we will miss you. So thank you very much for being here. So this one is sort of directed at the agency folks a bit more. Maybe Kim, I'll have you step in first, but I have a question about, did the roadmap change the direction of any of your programming, or was it sort of just a foundation and support system for much of the nature-based solutions work you were already doing?
So I would say that it's fairly recent that it came out. You can't really shift the investments of a federal agency quite that quickly. So I would say that it really helps to support and justify some of the directions that we were investing in anyhow. It's been a great opportunity, the process, to connect more closely across the federal agencies on things that we've been thinking about and seeds that we've been planting in science and other decision support tools and things like that have allowed us to find connections with other agencies that are working on the same thing or investing in a similar way, so that we can make sure that we are doing it in a coordinated fashion moving forward, which is really that sort of scaling up and accelerating, right? Finding the places where we can leverage investments across the federal agencies and other partners to really move the implementation in a more speedy, scaled up way, I guess. So I think that's about what I can say.
Yeah. Stephanie, is that similar for EPA?
I think that, so going back to some of the comments we made earlier in the presentations about the EOs or executive orders, and Lydia, feel free to weigh in too. I think it's important to acknowledge that these priorities were always there from the very beginning. It was just being able to really be mindful about how we're drawing connections between those priorities and those goals to make sure that we're advancing them in an effective way, and we're doing that in under a whole of government approach. So that's why today I felt like it was helpful to highlight, kind of through the lens of climate adaptation and climate resilience, how we're thinking about better supporting and, as Kim said, accelerating the work that we've already been doing on nature-based solutions and green infrastructure at EPA. And it's definitely been, I think, a little bit of a mix of both. So there's definitely some changes, like Kim has said. We are seeing them at EPA from the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative, which has really scaled up the work in the Green Infrastructure Program. And you're also seeing more connections that we're drawing across federal agencies to FEMA and all of the other federal family partners that we work with. So it's been very positive.
I just want to add one note. I mean, one of the things that's been exciting to see is the kind of agencies all come up to the same, coming into the same space with the same kind of agreement on these priorities, and the ability to kind of jump right in and start working together on these issues. So it's been really exciting to see that across the agencies. And then there are agencies and programs that are not as accustomed to doing nature-based solutions as the NOAA and EPA programs we're hearing from today. And for them, I think this will kind of bring it into the forefront more than it has been in the past. So I think it'll depend on the agency, but for some, I think it's, elevating what they're already doing. And for others, I think it is moving into new territory.
And we had a question that just came in that kind of follows up on that a little bit. Someone asks, would you say that cooperation among federal agencies is on its way to get true coordination to mainstream nature-based solutions among action priorities against climate change? So are you seeing sort of cross-agency cooperation on particular initiatives in this space? Anyone who has seen that, please jump in.
I can just jump at a higher level, and then I'm sure that there are other examples that Kim and Stephanie can provide. I'd say that there's already a lot of these kind of regional coordination efforts underway. EPA's got its NEPs and estuary programs. NOAA's got the estuary reserves, and there are so many of these regional programs around the Chesapeake Bay and Washington State and the Gulf, et cetera, where agencies are already collaborating on nature-based work. And so I'd say there's already a bunch of that underway. I do think there have been opportunities to scale that up from the recent funding that's coming through the bills that will provide new opportunities for collaboration in different spaces. Turn it over to them for more specifics.
I think that's right, Lydia. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that the report was also written for the National Climate Task Force. And so there will be outcomes, right, from the report coming out itself. right now, I think it's fair to say it's really interesting to think about how the activities that we're doing at the national level roll down to the states, roll down to communities, and then even watershed jurisdictions, because there is just so much shared implementation and kind of authority, even within the statutes that we're implementing with other government partners, with other stakeholders that are on the ground really doing the work, and the national estuary programs, our geographic programs, and our partnership programs that we have, like the Urban Waters Federal Collaborative, Federal Partnership program, which I did not get a chance to talk about. They are bringing federal agencies together on location with stakeholders in those communities and those watersheds to get the work done. So definitely check out more on our website about those.
Did you want to add anything?
No, I would just say yes, that there are a number of examples of ways that the federal agencies are working together to advance different components of the roadmap and to address our partner needs on the ground. So whether that be the development of the international guidelines led by the Army Corps, with a number of federal agencies and other partners engaged in that, or work that NOAA and FEMA are doing around advancing, understanding and use of nature-based solutions for hazard mitigation. There are a number of different, both formal and informal collaborations that are happening across the federal family that this work and the emphasis of the administration, as Stephanie said, will really help to support and move forward. So it's an exciting time.
We have a question here sort of focused on the private sector. So someone asks, could we discuss a little bit how collaborations are going with the private sector, specifically with investors, and were those conversations built into the kind of roadmap development? I know, Lydia, you mentioned that the private sector was involved in some of those initial conversations, and maybe this sort of lines up with your call to ask partners to develop their own roadmaps. I don't know, has anyone from the private sector come to you looking to do that?
Yeah, happy to, again, provide a very high level answer and then hope the agencies can step in with more specifics. So we did have conversations with the private sector to inform the roadmap. And I think the place in the roadmap where we really emphasized partnerships with the private sector is in the within the funding recommendations in terms of catalyzing private investment. There were a number of different ideas there for partnership with the private sector. And I think there's probably a number of other places where the private sector would play a great role. And I tried to highlight some of those in my presentation at the end and some examples of where we think the private sector and others could partner to really elevate nature-based solutions. And I'll hand it off to the agencies now.
I'm glad this question got asked, because I didn't get to this example that I have here, which is, I think, a really good one. So we can, through the SRFs and through the Water Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act program that we have at EPA, those two programs can really encourage public-private partnerships. And public-private partnerships can be particularly helpful for really getting these projects to scale and making sure that they're appropriately funded moving forward, especially in venues like cross-jurisdictional projects or watershed-wide projects where you're bringing a variety of folks together to get the work done. So I think one really good example that we have is where we worked with private sector partners, NGOs, government organizations in California. It was in Tahoe National Forest and the North Yuba River to develop this forest resilience bond that pools public and private capital for managing forest health and resilience, and delivered a variety of other social and economic benefits for the area. So that report is actually on EPA's website. If I can find it, I'll get it over to Sarah. But it's just a really great example of how that that innovative partnership has really pushed the work forward. That's directly relevant to this space we're talking about today.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Well, I'll just point folks, one example that I would give in this space is the implementation of the National Coastal Resilience Fund, which are the grants that are awarded through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, NFWF, does a really great job of leveraging private investments with those public dollars that they get to invest in coastal resilience and habitat restoration. I was just trying to look up the amount they just announced, the most recent awards. And so it says that they leveraged more than 97 million in matching contributions from other entities to be able to support those projects. So there's a lot of more information on the website, but that's a great example of one of the places where federal dollars can really leverage private investment for conservation and nature-based solutions.
Thank you. That's great to hear, and nice to hear these specific examples. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna just ask one final question. And it's coming from someone who says it's fantastic to see the progress that's being made in our technical understanding of nature-based solutions for reducing impacts of hazards and now with new funding opportunities. But are there any remaining sort of priority challenges for either the administration or the agencies that they're focused on for pushing nature-based solutions projects forward? And I know maybe identifying one is difficult, but any thoughts on sort of what's next and what challenges need to be tackled next? Lydia, do you have thoughts on that before you need to hop off?
Sure. I'll note that our report is a whole list of those challenges and ideas for how we're going to move forward. So I will just pick one. But one area that there's a lot of focus on right now, which pulls together a couple different threads across our report, is trying to figure out how to use the information we have on the effectiveness of nature-based solutions to better account for those benefits and things like benefit cost analysis, to pull together tools and models that will allow us to assess and do scenarios and planning for nature-based solutions projects so that we can understand the economic health and other well-being outcomes from these projects so that we can plan them correctly, we can account for their benefits correctly. And so that really depends on the evaluations of effectiveness that are ongoing and expanding on those and the science, building the models that support that, and then integrating those into the federal processes for decision-making. So those are all connected and highlighted in our report.
Yes, the report is a series of challenges, so that is true. Stephanie or Kim, any priority challenges you'd like to leave the group with before we sign off for the day?
I will just say, in the interest of time, so within the 20 climate adaptation implementation plans that I mentioned and that I sent over a link for, Sarah, all of those plans do have vulnerability analyses baked into them, right? That talk about vulnerabilities related to climate for the programmatic mission area or for the resource or media for the national program plans. And so I would definitely encourage folks to take a look at those to learn more about how nature-based solutions really was highlighted in the issues that those offices spotted, and then how those priority actions that they've committed to, which are looking out right to the future on how we're going to address those challenges and what we're going to really be executing, how they fit together, and just to get a sense of what that work looks like moving forward, because it's definitely in there.
Kim, I think a final challenge. No,
I think we're tackling enough right now. Okay. I'm happy with the direction we're going.
That's fair to say. Well, before we do sign off, I want to just take a moment and thank all of our panelists once again for sharing your time with us today. So thank you very much. And for everyone who's online, thank you so much for joining. Again, this was a really exciting presentation to hear for those of us working in the nature-based solutions space, to hear about everything that's going on and all of the great work that's moving forward. So I will share a link to the recording along with links to all of the resources that were mentioned by our panelists today. So everyone who registered for this webinar will receive an email from me in the coming days with all those resources. So take or keep an eye out for that, and I will sign us off. So thanks again for joining today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.